Hello, I'm Peter Labrie. This is my daily video for Tuesday, May 26th, the year 2020. Instead of a bunch of little things, I decided to talk about two big issues and then close up to make it shorter or make it longer. I'm not sure which is which. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act is passed by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Andrew Johnson 2 days later. By President Andrew Jackson. The law authorized the president to negotiate with southern Native American tribes for the removal to federal territory west of the Mississippi in exchange for white settlement of their ancestral lands. That's literally what the law says, which sort of spells and gives you an idea of exactly what the law is going to do. President Washington wanted to convert the Indians to our ways. When he was president, the first president of the United States. His idea was, in an effort to force assimilation with colonial culture, Indians were encouraged to convert to Christianity, learn to speak and read English, and adopt European-style economic practices, such as individual ownership of land and property. Some Indians even became American citizens. The Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskie Creek, Somali, and the original Cherokee nations have been established as autonomous nations in the southeastern United States, just as the U.S. government wanted to do on certain pieces of territory. The states did not like this idea and would ignore Indian territory because they wanted more farming territory or for various other reasons. And they believed that it was an affront to the state's autonomy of themselves, the state's separation from the federal government. Georgia had a gold rush in years 1928 to 1929, which is interesting because the gold was actually in Indian territory. So that didn't go off too well in Georgia. A few Indians stayed, but most had to leave. Indians who were citizens were also not considered to be citizens, also had to leave. Some Indians left ahead of time. The rest of the Indians were forced to march out, whether they agreed to or not, on something that became known as the Trail of Tears. It was apparently along the same path. One group of Indians after another were forced to march, many of them dying along this path. At one place, they had to cross the river, and apparently any person who crossed the river was usually charged 12 cents to cross this river. The Indians were charged $1. And they had to wait for other people to cross the river. Even the other people weren't even there yet, because the boat had to wait for other people to cross the river. So sometimes it took days for the Indians to cross the river. And the Indians were forced marched to watch with very few clothes. In wintertime, they would freeze to death, waiting to cross the river. And apparently, a lot of the Indians were murdered by local people. So the Indians forced marches very hard. They had to look for food and stuff along the way. Apparently, if you go along the same trail, it gets picked over. So the next set of Indians going through found very little food. So large numbers and segments of the Indians died along the way. Davy Crockett protested this, and it was described by some as being genocide for the Indians. So it was not a good time for them. I have some Native American quotes. One does not sell the land people walk on. Crazy horse. There is but one secret to success. Never give up. Ben Nighthorse Campbell. May the stars carry your sadness away. May the flowers fill your heart with beauty. May hope forever wipe away your tears. And above all, may silence make you strong. Chief Dan George. Yes, I guess some of the Indians really did adopt the ways of the white people, including their names. The Hopi Native Americans are a cultural group often referred to as the oldest of people by some Native American tribes. In his book of the Hopi, American writer Frank Waters says that they regard themselves as the first inhabitants of America, and that their village of Arabi is indisputably the oldest continuously occupied settlement in the United States. And they have a saying, "Don't be afraid to cry. It will free your mind of sorrowful thoughts." Unless you think it was only the United States that did things to Indians and other indigenous people, we have another example. I ran across something called the National Sorry Day in Australia, which is commemorated on the 26th of May every year since 1998. I was wondering, what is the National Sorry Day? So I had to find out. The National Sorry Day, or National Day of Healing, is an annual event that has been held in Australia to remember and commemorate the mistreatment of the country's indigenous people as part of an ongoing process of reconciliation between indigenous people and the settler population. Now, a country doesn't actually do a holiday like that unless there's something in particular. I was aware that most of the indigenous people in Australia lived in the interior of Australia, and most of the settlers lived along the coast. Now, the coast of Australia is actually pretty nice to live in, but the interior is like the Badlands. And yes, when the settlers came, a lot of the indigenous people left from the coastline and went into the interior. Or maybe they were pushed, I'm not sure. So that was not great. But that's not quite the only thing that this day commemorates. There was something else. During the 20th century, Australian government policies caused children to be separated from their families, with the intention of assimilating them into white Australian culture. This resulted in what came to be known as stolen generations, with the effect of these traumatic removals being felt by succeeding generations even today. I was going to need a little more talking about. The stolen generations, also known as stolen children, were the children of Australia Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. The Torres Strait is above the northern peak of Australia, below Papua New Guinea. Apparently there are over 100 islands in this strait, and there are indigenous people living on those islands. And apparently they fish, so they go to the mainland, and they mixed up with a little bit with the people, the indigenous people that live on the mainland. And they create children the Australians called half-caste children. And the Australian people had some concerns about it, which I'm not altogether clear on understanding it. But they thought that the idea of the intermingling of the people was taking advantage of them and their children. And there were a bunch of reasons, all of which seemed to be connected to protecting the children. So that from the period from 1905 to 1967, children were conducted and removed from homes. Sometimes some people were in hospitals to take the children away the instant they were born if they were recognized as being half-caste children. It was supposedly stopped in 1967, though in some places it went on till 1970. It was a person in the government who was appointed for the northern area as steward or guardian of the children. And they had apps to make everything legal. They had the authority and guardianship over the children. And they were totally behind the program. Official estimates from the government that in certain regions between 1 and 10 or 1 in 3 indigenous Australian children were forcibly taken from families and communities in 1910 to 1970. The total is perhaps 25 to 100,000 people, 100,000 children, or 25,000 children. No one's really sure because of lack of records. And the reasons are not altogether clear. The children were mostly put into like religious groups, sanctuaries and places like that, or they were put with families. Those that is white settler type families. So they can be indoctrinated as white settler types and away from their Aborigine original families. Some of them were very young and some of them were a little older. But there were a lack of records and we don't really know a whole lot beyond what the government has told us about it. And so we have some sayings from the Aborigine people. Faith Bandler, civil rights activist and campaigner during the 1967 referendum, says, "The one word yes on May 27 will open the door for real reform. It'll tell the world at large that there is only one Australian, and his color doesn't matter at all." We have another Australian Aboriginal saying, "We are all visitors to this time, this place. We are just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, learn, grow, and to love, and then we return home." From a person named Badroro, we have a saying, "Our spirituality is our oneness, and our interconnectedness with all that lives and breathes, and even with all that does not live or breathe." And from Jim Rohn, "The more you know, the less you need to say." It's interesting to see what happens when you have a bunch of laws and a bunch of ideas about protecting children. Because that's, every reason I read seemed to be connected to the idea of protecting the children. Especially young females from interactions with others. And then things seem to go on and balloon into something much bigger. So today's Bible verse of the day. "Blessed are those who keep his testimonies, who seek him with their whole heart." Psalms 119:2. And from Ronald Reagan, something which I cannot quite figure out exactly when he said it, though I have a couple of news stories about it. But apparently, at least at a function at the Gridiron Club Diner, he opened up a question and news thing by saying, "Before I refuse to answer questions, I have an opening statement." That was Ronald Reagan who said that. So that's his famous humorous statement. That's probably what most of the politicians should say. And that's all for today. This is Peter Liberty, over and out. Thank you very much for watching me. I appreciate it.